All right, everybody, here we are for one more incredible installment of Thursday evening Bible study. We've been working our way through the book of Ecclesiastes for a little while now. And according to my count, we should be ready for Ecclesiastes 4, verse 13. We'll see how far we get this evening. That is entirely up to how well I explain things and how many questions you all will have. If you do happen to be watching it online or later on Facebook or YouTube, not Facebook, on YouTube, and you have a question or a comment, by all means, feel free to post that. All of the Bible study things that we've done for a long time are available on YouTube. They are, most of them, I'm not sure Ecclesiastes is, but all the rest of them that we've done are on their own video playlist, so you can just pull up Philippians and you can work your way through all of Philippians. You can pull up spiritual disciplines and you can work your way through all of those if you want. Share them with a friend, whatever you'd like to do. So anyway, just want to make sure that you're aware of that because part of the class is kind of new, and I don't know what anybody knows about anything, because nobody listens to me, right, Susan? Right. Okay, well, let's start in Ecclesiastes 4. Hopefully everybody's there. Better a poor but wise youth than an old but foolish king who no longer knows how to heed a warning. The youth may have come from prison to the kingship, or he may have been born into poverty within his kingdom. I saw that all who lived and walked under the sun followed the youth, the king's successor. There was no end to all the people who were before them. But those who came later were not pleased with the successor. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. All right, so just a little bit of a refresher here in chapter 4. The teacher, Koheleth, that's what the teacher is in Hebrew, or it's most likely King Solomon. At the beginning of chapter 4, we were talking about oppression. We have talked about work and toil. We have talked about working alone. And so now we've moved on to something that may or may not be related about the king and his successor. So it sort of feels like the teacher starts here with verse 13 with a little proverb or a sort of a moral. It's better to be wise and young without any influence than to be an older king with influence who isn't very aware or discerning. Maybe he used to be, but the longer he goes, the less, I hate to say the less with it he becomes, but he isn't capable as he used to be to read the situation and to take the advice of good counselors. So then, the teacher shows why that proverb is true. And I will say that as I read through those 4 or 5 verses, it really kind of reminds me of a handful of stories from the Old Testament. Maybe you'll have that same idea. Perhaps it's something that he has seen take place in his own life. So somehow, a young man, a wise young man, becomes the king. He has been raised in poverty. He doesn't have wealth and privilege, but somehow he becomes the king. Now, that piece right there sort of reminds me a little bit of a couple of kings. One obvious one would be David. Not a royal family, just some scrubby, sweaty shepherd out in the field around Bethlehem doing his job. And he became the king of Israel after King Solomon, who was older, but without the ability to take a good warning from anybody. So Solomon may have heard some stories from his dad David about all of that. I'm sure that's one of the things they talked about at Thanksgiving and Christmas, sitting around the table by the fire, camping, roasting marshmallows, all that kind of stuff. They talked about how awful it was when Saul was the king. He had started so well, but he just got more and more foolish. Or it also reminds me a little bit of going way farther back of Joseph. Joseph was not technically the king. He did come from a non-royal family. He was a little Hebrew boy who came to Egypt because he is sold into slavery. That would certainly be poverty. But he was really wise. He had the ability to see dreams and visions from God. He was able to interpret things and get people on the right track. And as a result, he ended up being second only to the Pharaoh of Egypt. So both of those stories make me, I kind of read between the lines here, that these young men with great promise and potential, but no nobility, rose to power, became great kings. The difference is that Joseph finished really well in Egypt. David fell off his chair and broke his neck after painful children, constant threats of overthrow, even by his own kin. So, anyway, I thought I would throw that out there. Again, we can't really know what the writer of Ecclesiastes is aiming at. Maybe he's just making something up. Preachers are known to do that once in a while. Just tell stories that make a point. So anyway, this young king, without any real background, young man becomes the king of the country. And as happens often, everybody is in love with the young king. He is wonderful. He is a breath of fresh air. None of the corruption and whatever that has been taking place in the kingdom before. Everybody appreciates what he's doing. They praise him. They laud him. They put up statues. They have parades. All those kind of things. But as we know, situations change. So the young king doesn't stay young forever. You take a look at pictures of the presidents who have served in the last 40 years. They start out young and vital and looking great. Their hair is the right color. Everything is taut and firm and not wrinkly. And when they leave, you think,
holy moly.
Wow, they've been beat to death. The responsibility of that job is very draining in lots of ways. And so as this young king gets older, the following generations do not have the same love affair with him that their parents or grandparents did.
That's because the media got in there and
I'm sure it's all.
So are we talking about David? Is that what we're talking about?
Could be.
Oh, it's just a young king.
It is a young king who really kind of came from nothing to become the king. Everything was great, but the older he got, the harder it was to deal with things. There's a line there in verse 16. There was no end to all the people who were before them, but those who came later were not pleased with the successor. Okay, I had a little bit of trouble with that. I think what he's aiming at here is to say, kind of like he has way back in the beginning of Ecclesiastes, generations come, generations go. The sun rises, the sun sets. Everything kind of comes around in a circle. New young king, everybody loves him, doing great. Peak of power and popularity, oh. And the children and the grandchildren of the people who loved him go, this guy's out of touch. What a jerk. He doesn't care about us at all. All he cares about is sitting in his palace and doing whatever they do, play golf or something. Lots of popular young rulers have come and gone. There were great kings before, there'll be great kings after. This great king is just one name in a list. And so after he says that, those who came later were not pleased with the successor. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. What do you think the focus of that paragraph is? What is the thing that's meaningless or empty?
Probably the ones that didn't come later did not rejoice in it. I would say.
So what do you think that's really talking about, though?
I'm not sure.
Maybe it was all his wives. I mean, he had a lot, you know, and
Solomon had a lot of women.
maybe by that time, you know, he was not leading very well.
They weren't pleased with him. This too is meaningless. I kind of think, and maybe you're getting there like I did. The NIV and the paragraph header says advancement is meaningless. There's lots of other ways that he could show that advancements and promotion and power is meaningless. I think it has more to do with popularity. Popularity and influence. We know that popularity and influence is a terribly fleeting, wispy pile of nothing. One day you are on top of everything. You are a thought influencer in our culture. Everybody listens to everything you have to say, and all it takes is about one dumb move or one accusation, and
You're gone.
history. And then there are people that are famous and popular with influence, and you say, I don't know why. Kardashians, if you're watching, I don't know why anybody listens to anything you have to say.
Yeah, I don't either.
I don't get it.
I don't watch
Never
it.
did.
But I do know that seasons come and seasons go,
That's
and
right.
we can only hope that the time of the Kardashians is passing.
But we've seen that with a lot of stars.
Okay, absolutely. Oh, and going back 100 years, people who were at the peak of their game in every movie, they had every great #1 album, whatever it was. They come, they make people's brains fall out. They're so popular, screaming and crying and passing out.
And then the next
And-
person comes along with more,
Yeah.
and they,
And when you go to find one of their CDs, I'll explain that in the comments for the younger folks watching. They're in the dollar bin at Walmart, because
and so's their movie.
who cares? Yeah.
But the story about, and we all know about Kennedy,
Yes.
and we watched, and it was Camelot, and everything was wonderful, and we saw all this, things that he was, and then all of a sudden, things changed. And we got to know the real person, and it wasn't as pretty.
That's true.
The Kardashians take off their makeup.
Nobody recognizes them.
No. I mean, it's the same.
Yeah.
If the king walked down the street without all of his king stuff, would anybody know who he was?
I think that's one of the points of the paragraph, is that a young, cute king may come into power and everybody will love him, but they're not going to love him all the way forever. His time is going to come and go. His popularity is going to wax and wane, and we'll be looking for the next shiny new thing to come along. And that's what he says is meaningless. It is chasing after the wind. Grab all of it you can. Stuff it in your pockets. Try to keep it. Good luck. Deep thoughts before we move on to chapter number 5. You're all buying that? Everybody's good with it?
Yep.
Popularity is fleeting. Work is fleeting. Labor is fleeting. Pleasure is fleeting. What's next? Can't wait. chapter 5, verse 1. Guard your steps when you go to the house of God. Go near to listen rather than to offer the sacrifice of fools, who do not know what they do wrong, or who do not know that they do wrong. Sorry. Do not be quick with your mouth. Do not be hasty in your heart to utter anything before God. God is in heaven, and you are on earth, so let your words be few. A dream comes when there are many cares, and many words mark the speech of a fool. We'll pause there for a second to talk about some things. For some people, I believe the statements are absolutely literal. Guard your steps when you go to the house of God. I don't know how many people coming to church have tripped over the curb. Watch your steps, please. We've done our best to put yellow paint there. Some of you are just not paying attention.
It's just easy to walk off.
Yes, it is. But I don't believe that is the point of the passage here. These verses, from verse 1 down through verse 7, really have to do with the right kind of attitude for approaching the temple to worship God. And I think that probably the right attitude there would include caution and restraint. Be careful and don't do anything dumb. So, in those verses, we didn't read all of them just yet. But in this section, he talks about offering sacrifices and extending prayers up to God, as well as making vows. The teacher says you need to guard your steps. Okay? What do you think guarding steps really is all about? It's not super tricky.
I think to watch our faith, that we should walk, we're going to church, and we should walk that way, in Godly's way.
Walking is all through the Bible, Old and New
Yes.
Testament. That is a symbol for the way we live our lives.
Yes.
Like in the New Testament, they even just say it like that. Be careful how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise. That has less to do with putting your feet in various places on the
Right.
ground, and more about the way that you conduct every piece of your life. So guarding your steps is really equivalent to saying, kind of watch your steps, but be very careful about how you live.
There's other people watching you, and if you're not walking like you're supposed to, you're not going to guide those people to Christ, because you're not doing what you're supposed to.
That is a piece of it. We need to walk the right way because there is always somebody watching.
That's right.
Always, even when we're not aware of it.
That's
And
right.
especially more and more in our society, there's cameras every place.
Yes.
So watching your conduct, how you walk, where you walk, that's very important. What he says is that when we draw near to God for worship, we have to take responsibility for our lifestyle and our conduct. How we are is nobody else's fault but our own.
Yeah.
Nobody is responsible for it but us. Nobody carries the burden for it but us. It's all on us. We may like to say, well, my parents were, and my daddy was, and when I was in school, we didn't. Okay, that's all true, but you carry the burden for how you live your life now. You've either chosen to go with your upbringing or away from your upbringing, or some of both, depending on which piece of it.
Mm-hmm.
When we come near to God, what the teacher says is, what does it say about listening? Go to listen, not to say something stupid.
Yeah, be quick to listen, slow to speak.
That's over in James, and it's still true, even in the Old Testament 1,000 years earlier. Quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry. We want to be very careful, especially when for for Solomon's readers who would go to the temple and make a promise, they would make a vow to God. They would offer some kind of a prayer. The caution is, keep your mouth shut. Yeah. Be careful of what you say, because there are consequences. Really, the picture that he paints is that it's better to go to the temple to listen for God's voice than to rush in there and stumble all over yourself trying to impress God with the way you pray or the promises that you're going to make. You're not going to impress God with any big display of public holiness or public worship. He knows what's going on. You may fool the rest of the people in the room. You're not fooling God.
Right.
Obedience is always better than sacrifice. Let's look at a couple passages. Okay, let's go to the left first to 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel 15. Back past Job, back past Ezra and Nehemiah, Esther, back past the Chronicles. That's back there. Back past Kings. 1 Samuel is in front of 2 Samuel.
1 Samuel or 2 Samuel?
1 Samuel 15. You're getting there. Verse 22. Let's hope that it's right in my notes. 1 Samuel 15, 22. Ah, yes. Samuel was talking to Saul, who has just done a stupid thing. I'll let you read that on your own. Samuel replied, "Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice. To heed is better than the fat of rams." And then it goes on. "Rebellion is like the sin of divination, arrogance like the evil of idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, God has rejected you, Saul, as king." Boom. Okay. Go back to Ecclesiastes and hang it right. To Amos. Past Ezekiel. Amos, Obadiah, Jonah. Amos chapter 5. Amos 5, 21 to 24. So a little longer passage. The Lord is speaking. I despise your religious festivals. Your assemblies are a stench to me. Even though you bring me burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. Though you bring choice fellowship offerings, I will have no regard for them. These pages. Away with the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the music of your harps, but let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never failing stream. Amos 5, 21 to 24. Obedience is better than sacrifice. God always cares way more about broken hearts that are soft and willing to yield to Him. He's much more interested in that than he is parades and choirs and bands and burnt sacrifice. Over in Psalm 51, after David commits adultery with Bathsheba, there in Psalm 51, he says essentially the same thing. The sacrifices of God are a broken and contrite heart. That's what he's really looking for. So, what the truth of Ecclesiastes 5 is, pay way more attention to the things that you're saying once you get to the temple than making some kind of ridiculous physical overture in front of dozens and dozens of people to try to convince them of how godly or how holy or how righteous you are. So that's verse 1. Go to listen instead of throwing out some big ridiculous sacrifice. Verse 2 focuses on speech. Don't be quick with your mouth or hasty in your heart to utter anything before God. Let your words be few. Be careful with your words. Because God is in heaven and you're not. You should be extra careful with what you promise. If you make a vow to God, you make a promise to Him, you had better be sure to deliver it. If you're not going to keep this vow, you shouldn't say it out loud. The difference between who God is and who we are is so vast, it's so immense that we really ought not be too familiar with Him, too casual with Him, too flippant with Him. You know, God is not just our buddy. God is the creator of the universe and the eternal judge of all of us. So if we're going to make a promise, we better think about it before it comes out of our mouths. I know you've never said anything like, Lord, if you can just get this freight train out of my way, I have got to get to work. I cannot be late again. If you'll just get this freight train moving, I will. If you'll keep my kids from doing something stupid this evening while they're out, I will be eternally grateful, and I promise I will always. You can fill in those blanks with whatever. We've made those kind of promises. Lord, I swear, you get me through this physics test today, and I promise, I totally promise I will always go to youth group forever and ever.
You don't know anybody that's done that.
Physics was the only class I ever got a D in. It was tragic. Tragic. So, we had better be very careful about what we say, because if we make a promise to Him, He is going to expect, because we understand our relationship to Him, that we're going to fulfill that promise. A holy, supreme God has righteous wrath, and He should be revered and feared. Not cowering in the corner, I can't look at Him, He's going to smite me with His mighty smiter. But bowing down in worship, because we recognize that He is eternal and universal and everywhere and all knowledge and all love, and we're a disaster. Okay, then in verse 3, he touches on dreams. A dream comes where there are many cares, many words mark the speech of a fool. I think maybe what he's going for there is that dreams really don't last very long. If you're having dreams because you ate chili too late at night, those dreams are vivid and weird. Thankfully, they don't come true. Dreams are kind of like some of our words. We think, man, my word is my bond. I said it, I meant it. That's what. But things change. Things go away. So we really, I think, more of an underscoring to say we need to be very careful about what we say. When it comes to vows to God, we should be very careful, and we should use restraint. We're not going to try to manipulate the God of the universe to doing our bidding. He's not the genie of the lamp. We don't make conditions for him, because if we have a vow that we've made and we don't fulfill it, what we see in the Bible is that really honks God off. He does not respond well to people who say, I will, and then won't. So, I think in that whole section, down through verse 7, when you make a vow to God, do not delay to fulfill it. He has no pleasure in fools. Fulfill your vow. It is better not to make a vow than to make one and not fulfill it. Do not let your mouth lead you into sin. Do not protest to the temple messenger, my vow was a mistake. Why should God be angry at what you say and destroy the work of your hands? Much dreaming and many words are meaningless, therefore fear God. Okay? Our attitude before God is the real key in this section. We have to control our words. We have to control our actions. We must be very careful about the steps of our lives, how we walk, because we stand in awe of a supremely righteous and holy God. He is nothing like us, and we should be extremely careful. I think that'll preach. Ready to move on to verse 8, or did you have a question or a comment about that?
Mine says in a reference, 5:4 vow, in Scripture, the fool is not one who cannot learn, but one who refuses to learn.
That's right.
You can get smarter. Not everybody can make wise choices because they don't want to. They're happy to go along. All right, verse 8 of chapter 5. If you see the poor oppressed in a district, and justice and rights denied, do not be surprised at such things, for one official is eyed by a higher one, and over them both are another higher still. The increase from the land is taken by all, the king himself profits from the fields. Okay, so the teacher goes back to oppression. He's already talked a little bit about that. Back in chapter 3, verse 16, back in chapter 4, in verse 1. Oppression is not good. It is not godly. It is not righteous. It happens a lot, but that doesn't mean that it's okay. There is an obligation for us to practice justice, to carry things out in a just and correct and fair manner. So when we get to verse 8 and 9, we've just been talking about the fact that God is different, He is supreme, He is just, He is over us. And so this paragraph, verses 8 and 9, direct us to see that in life, someone is always watching over us. We kind of touched on that,
Yes.
but we meant all of our neighbors. What we should also realize is that God, the King, is always watching over us as well. Because someone is always watching, I think the tendency for many of us is to try to look as good in their eyes as possible. We don't want to trip. We don't want to have gravy on our shirt. We don't want to say the wrong thing at the wrong time. We want to get it right because we recognize that somebody's looking, the supervisor has got his eyes on, or her eyes on, in the office. And sometimes we may be tempted to walk all over the people who are under us at work or in life in an effort to try to impress the boss. And so who suffers there? The people who are under us. They're doing their job. They're minding their own business. They're carrying out the mission of the organization. But we decided we'd like to shine a little prettier than they do in the office, and so we stomped all over them. We handed them our stack of work in addition to what they had to do on their own. That would be oppression. Taking advantage of somebody else for our own benefit. He's looking at unjust hierarchies, unjust bureaucracies. Somebody has a supervisor who has a supervisor who has a supervisor. Even he mentions the king at the end of the paragraph. The king is on the take too. He gets the benefit from the fields. Apparently in part of this picture anyway, the king is corrupt too. He should be different. He should be a good king. He should be bringing about justice and righteousness. He should be protecting his people. But instead, at least here, it seems like he's just letting people get walked all over, so his people, his underlings, his lieutenants and commanders end up with benefit, but ultimately he ends up with the most benefit. Getting more stuff is meaningless, especially when it is at the expense of somebody else. The discussion of oppression brings up both ambition and greed. Let's read a few more verses here. Verse 10, whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. This too, meaningless. As goods increase, so do those who consume them. And what benefit are they to the owners except to feast their eyes on them? The sleep of a laborer is sweet, whether they eat little or much, but as for the rich, their abundance permits them no sleep. I have seen a grievous evil under the sun. Wealth hoarded to the harm of its owners, or wealth lost through some misfortune, so that when they have children, there is nothing left for them to inherit. Okay, so he takes 4 or 5 verses to talk about greed, the love of more and more, bigger and better. Greed leads to oppression, doesn't it? You want more stuff, you've got a little bit of influence and power, and so, hey, crew, we're working overtime. I need to make a bass boat payment. Let's go. Okay? Riches don't satisfy. That's why the love of wealth is meaningless and empty, because it's never enough. In 1992, when I had finished interviewing for my first ministry in Indiana, it finally occurred to me that I should ask what I was going to be paid. It was the last thing we talked about. And they said, well, James, we are prepared to offer you an annual salary of, and when they gave me that number, I thought, how will I ever spend all that money? $19,500 a year. Oh my gosh, how am I going to spend that kind of money? That is crazy. And then I realized about 1 month into ministry, how am I ever going to make it? Oh my gosh. I hadn't anticipated this or this or this or that. I believe that every year that I've been in ministry, I've either gotten a little bit of a raise or I've maintained. There's not been a point where they said, yeah, we're going backwards, like a big jump. It's always been equal to or better. And you know what? The number that I think I need that would solve all my problems is always just a little bit more than what I got right now. Maybe your family has been that same way. You're making $50,000 a year. Well, you know, if we had 55, then that would fix everything. We're making $100,000 this year with all of our income. Well, if we had 125, then we could really do something. We wouldn't be living hand to mouth. Okay, you're not living hand to mouth at 100,000. Well, if you are, you haven't listened to Dave Ramsey at all. But that's a whole other discussion. Okay? With wealth, it's always, we just had a little bit more. Not a lot more, just a little bit more. Right? Nobody goes into negotiations saying, boy, I hope they keep my salary the same. No. The amount will always disappoint. It is not the security blanket that everybody assumed it would be. Riches never satisfy. Sometimes, he goes on to talk about some of the problems with wealth. Sometimes the fear of losing wealth keeps people from being able to sleep at night. They never can totally relax. About 40 years ago, my grandma and granddad went in a little tiny airplane that belonged to a friend of theirs from church. He took them on a ride over Indiana. They went from one side of the state to this other side of the state just for lunch. And my grandma said after it was all over that she didn't ever put all of her weight down in the seat because she didn't want the plane to crash. She never really got all the way comfortable. And you know that that's crazy because she was crazy, but you've done the same kind of thing. You never really totally relaxed all the way into whatever the situation is. How could I get a little bit extra? What if somebody wants to try to take my stuff away from me? Do I really have enough? You know, retirement for me is still that direction. And I'm thinking, well, we've been pretty careful, but things are crazy. What if what we have put away isn't enough? Is Cole going to have a good enough job that I can move in with him for the rest of my life?
No, you don't want to. No, don't go there.
Afford you.
Don't go there. I said to Kenny, I hope I never have to live with you. And she said to me, so does Dwayne. Her husband.
Thank God for Cora.
I'd say that too if I was you.
So fear of losing it can really cause people problems. They've got money, but what if they don't have, what if they need one more quarter? What if they're putting off retirement 6 more months just to make just a little bit more to put in the bank? Then it's another 6 months, and another 6 months. They're 85 years old, they're still working 50 hours a week because they're just not sure they have enough. Sometimes the wealth gets hoarded. We've seen people who have hoarded money and possessions, and we have seen that their lives have been destroyed by it. It can be really harmful to the person who has hoarded all that wealth. They haven't spent a nickel. They've been miserable their whole lives, so they had enough money. Guess what? Massive heart attack, they're dead, and everybody else gets their stuff.
And they fight over it.
Yes.
It's a true story. Death brings out the worst in people.
Sometimes the wealth gets lost somehow. Maybe it's not through any fault of your own. Some of you may have lost a bunch of retirement back in 2008. It was pretty dicey for a lot of people. There were a lot of people who ended up getting to work a lot longer than they had planned to because of the changes there. Was that their fault? Nope. It was a blip, one little hiccup, and it trashed people's finances. That stuff was gone forever. What Solomon says as he looks at the power that wealth has in a person's life is that it is a grievous evil. It can mean a sickening tragedy. He says specifically that the really worst thing that he has seen is that a bad investment destroys somebody's wealth, and so if they have children to whom they were planning to pass their estate on, there is nothing to give. You may remember back a couple chapters ago when he was talking about the poor guy who doesn't have a father or a brother or any family, and he kills himself doing his job, and he's got nobody to give his wealth to. Well, this is the backside of that. This is somebody who has worked and has heirs, their children and grandchildren, and when it's time to give them something, nothing is left because of a market crash or an earthquake or a fire or a flood, and everything is gone. That is what he says is a horribly sickening tragedy. I think we're going to call it there.
And I think illness can take it too.
Oh, absolutely.
Cancer's expensive.
Yes, it is.
A heart attack is expensive.
Assisted living
Oh,
is
so go there.
expensive.
Very.
Somebody I was just talking to, it wasn't, maybe it was some kind of an assisted living deal. I wish I could remember who I was talking to, that would tell me what it was. But when they heard how much it was gonna cost, like $595. Oh, $595, we can do that. No, that's a day. $595 a day. Oh, it was some kind of kids program. They were going to put their kids in some kind of special thing to help them learn to make decisions and get healthy. It was $600 a day, not $600 a month.
For a year.
Yeah, and that will very quickly eat up the IRA.
Yeah.
All right. Please do not do anything drastic. I know some of this is kind of woe is me, gloom, doom, and despair. And we all ought to be wearing bib overalls, red long johns, and those big floppy hats when we come to study Ecclesiastes with that big old bloodhound laying on the porch or something. Did you need to sing the song, Susan?
What song?
Gloom, despair, and agony on the world. Deep, dark depression,
You must
excessive
be the oldest
misery.
one in here.
No, I just watched really old TV.
Oh,
I watched Lawrence Welk because my grandparents did. All of
but
them.
you know, you were talking about your mother in the airplane. My father was a very, very smart man.
My grandmother.
He was, or your grandmother, I'm sorry. I know your mother. He was a corporate lawyer. And he was a very, very intelligent man. He was born in 1898, but he never did understand how man could fly. So when your grandmother was in that airplane, maybe she was like, I don't know if I'm ready for this. Without putting her whole weight in the seat.
She was just as cute as she could be, and I miss her every day.
That's my dad every day.
Well, friends, thanks. I'm going to sign off here for YouTube. Thanks for being with us. Go ahead and go back over chapter 4 and 5. Get it into your brain. We'll pick up here with the middle of chapter 5 next time. See ya.